the endless misinformation that's out there, wild spreading. There's this clear division between the miners, the rockhounds, and then the new age.
Metaphysical aspects that people are interested in, geologists, mineralogists, they are just dismissive of it.
We were looking to get a mineralogist on the podcast that we're doing, and Gabby sends me a message saying, "Oh, I got a mineralogist who's going to come on the podcast," which we've been having a difficult time getting somebody because nobody wants to talk about and address the elephants in the room that are going on the other side of the industry. So anyway, the other day I'm like, who did you get? And she was like, "Oh, I got this guy, Dr. Alex Speer." And I was like, what? How did you do that? Because people don't know, or probably wouldn't know, how relevant you actually are to the Mineralogy Society and the things that you have done. I love mineralogy, and I'm so excited to talk to you. In the mineralogy world, you are a big fish, and I don't think people would understand what that even means. And it's part of why I wanted to have a mineralogist on the podcast, was to really give information and context to the millions of people now who are out there collecting minerals and dealing with stones and crystals. The thing that people might not understand now is that the MSA is really your go-to for your answers when it comes to mineralogy.
Yes, it's of course, some of the other mineralogical societies may say they also contribute, so there's a number of them throughout the world.
One of the things that is happening now, because I believe that the Mineralogical Society's website is a little bit hard to read for the average individual, right? So if someone's trying to research a mineral or a crystal, what they're looking for is, does rose quartz give me love? Right. And
Yep.
if you go to the MSA's website, what you're going to find is composition and X, Y, and Z, right? Crystallization and Mohs scale. You're going to find all of these things. You're not going to really find the information that makes sense to somebody on a standard level, especially someone who's not dealing in geology or mineralogy.
Obviously, MSA is geared towards professionals. One thing that we do different than most scientific societies, we do attend, of course, attend the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. For the last couple of years, I've been attending, or we've been exhibiting some local rock and mineral shows. And so that's where we really meet the general public, the type of folks who are your customers.
Well, not just my customers, but who's kind of taking the industry, so to speak, and keeping it really relevant. The problem is that with keeping it relevant and the people that are coming in and doing that and putting their hands around it, their research is not diligent, and the misinformation and the disinformation that's currently circulating amongst the average crystal collector is very, very high. I mean, I know it from my own personal experience, because now I get clients who come in and ask me for a unicorn stone, and I'm like, I have no idea what that is, and then it turns out it's just like a scepter quartz or something to this degree, or it's a lepidolite with mica in it. There's so many different things going on now. When you got into the MSA in 1994, it was in pretty bad shape, if I'm not mistaken, financially speaking, and also as far as its ability to grow and reach people. And when you came in 1994, there's a noticeable uptick in what wound up happening. And I don't want to say you essentially saved the day, but did you kind of save the day there?
What Paul Ribby said when he called me up, this will be relatively simple job. Basically, the only thing we did was publish the American Mineralogist, which is the yellow things in the back, and the reviews in mineralogy geochemistry, which is on the slant it shows behind me. And that was about pretty much it. After we sort of got settled in, other outside forces began to work. In other words, electronic publishing, which was still many years away, or electronic distribution, but it was clear that was going to happen. So it was quite clear that that was going to be something wherein we'd have to think about doing electronic publishing and also getting all the back issues online, that sort of thing. The other thing that happened, which was very important, one of the presidents, Rod Ewing, had some ideas about sort of coordinating or having different societies work together. And eventually he came up and proposed the things Elements Magazine. I don't know if you've seen that. That's a cooperative effort now among 16 international mineralogical geochemical and petrologic societies.
Could I just ask you real quick? Could you please explain to us what petrology is?
Petrology is just the study of rocks. You have mineralogy where you're studying the minerals. And then when you study a rock, it's made up of several minerals. And so you're doing more than just sort of identifying the minerals that are present. You're looking at how did those minerals come to be together.
Yeah, which I think that most people don't even know that word.
When geologists study, quote, rocks, they study for many different reasons, but what we get is the geologic history. If you want to know why, gee, we know the geologic history of the Earth and the universe or the solar system, because people are studying, looking at rocks and looking at how the minerals there just sort of came to be.
What actually led you in the direction of becoming a mineralogist yourself? And all of the other accolades that you have around all of this, but I heard you tell a story about a rock, which I don't know if you have that rock with you. I feel like you would, but you apparently found a quartz when you were quite
Actually, I
young.
haven't.
Yeah, I know you have it. So if you could please explain that rock that you found. Yeah, and you found that in a cornfield?
Yes, the neighbor had a truck farm. He grew asparagus and corn and things like that. And so when you plowed it up, I would just sort of walk the rows and you would find a quartz crystal. So anyway,
When you were walking the road, were you looking for crystals?
yes, generally they were fragments, but I was looking for the crystals. There weren't that many. It was a relatively small place.
About how old were you at this time?
I was probably 13, something like that.
Yeah, and you were just naturally, organically interested in it?
Well, of course, it was like any kid finding something, but I began to wonder why or how it came to be, what it was and that sort of thing. And then my parents bought one of those little golden book things on minerals and rocks.
Interestingly enough, I did have a question for you, which is what is quartz?
It's silica and oxygen that has a certain arrangement, crystal structure, and that generally defines the mineral. Quartzes can come in many forms. I mean, you have slightly different color quartzes. So you have the amethyst and the citrine and the smoky quartz. You also have things like blue quartz, which is really just sort of some sort of physical phenomena that causes the blueness to it.
I understand that mineralogy is a study in the field of geology. Is that correct?
Yes, it's one of the subdisciplines.
Yeah. What is the actual difference between a geologist and a mineralogist?
It's mostly sort of specialization. You have folks who are interested in fossils, so they are geologists and they are paleontologists. They study fossils. You have those who like the sort of the physical properties or deformation of rocks, in which case they are structural geologists. And so the mineralogists are those who just study the mineralogy. Petrologists, they tend to look at everything that is there, how the whole assemblage came together in order to get some idea of the geologic history or the physical properties, that sort of thing.
I think it's something that a lot of us in the crystal industry at this point don't really fully understand the differences between all of these because the words are often mixed into each other and not properly used. Being that you're setting up at local gem shows and you're attending the Tucson Gem Show, you're getting to see both worlds of the spectrum. And right now, from my side of the fence anyway, there's this clear division between the miners, the rockhounds, and then the new age community. Do you see that difference? Do you understand that there's those two sides of the fence?
We see it. I see it quite clearly. Also amongst the professionals as well. They are well aware of the metaphysical aspects that people are interested in. And I would say most charitably, they are just dismissive of it. They don't feel that that's something that's worthwhile or should be considered or something like that. But being at a local show, of course, I encounter these folks. And it's interesting the type of approach you get. The folks interested more in metaphysical are well aware that professional mineralogists would not be particularly happy with whatever it is they're saying or doing. And so they're rather sheepish and sort of feel like they might be offending me if they ask some questions. But generally, they do have mineralogic questions. What is this? Is this like this? Something, that sort of thing. There's a certain group of folks out there who are dismissive of what mineralogists, geologists believe. Let's say creationism is alive and well. One of the exhibits I have is various rocks that geologists have used to figure out the history of the solar system. For example, I have meteorites that have like chondrite meteorites, and the little chondrites in there are the first things, solid things to form in the solar system, and they've been dated. Man came along with his sun. The sun was probably 10 or so. They were looking at it, and I was explaining this is a meteorite. This is why it's here on this history thing, and talked about the date and that sort of thing. And then the father said to the son, that's what he believes. That's not necessarily what we believe. The reaction might be to argue with him and says, no, you're wrong or whatever. But no, that's what they believe. And they assume that's what I believe based on, the However, not being argumentative or anything, at least allowed me to go through the rest of the exhibit to explain. And basically the idea is presenting, this is what we believe or interpret. Professional mineralogists are well aware of the metaphysical community because just like when I go online or Google and ask to Google a mineral name, there's 4 or 5 pages of metaphysical stuff before you get actually to
Correct.
the science.
Right.
Type in the mineral name and also type in geology or mineralogy as well. So at least that gets me closer to what I was looking for.
I'm in this gray area where I can relate to and understand both mentalities, but from a scientific perspective, is it possible that stones and crystals can do some of the energetic things that people say they can do? Such as healing, protection from negativity, these kind of common narratives, love, money, success. Well, people are associating these rocks with some sort of value, and that by having the rock, the value is coming with that rock. For me, I believe it's become a poor sales pitch. That's my personal perspective on it. I believe that people use that as a sales pitch more than they actually believe it themselves. And so what they're doing is the retailers are feeding that information down to the consumer, and then the consumer is running wild with it. But what is your take on this?
One thing I would agree with you is I think a number of folks are using it as a sales pitch. When I'm looking for something unusual, I don't end up buying from one of those folks or one of those vendors who is using it as a sales pitch. But at least they have the material and it's at a good price. But anyway, I have never seen let's say, a scientific study to show that metaphysical aspects of the minerals work. I think you would, or at least I would require the same thing they would do when some drug manufacturer comes up with a new drug and says, this is the greatest thing since whatever. But then they have to do these double-blind studies and that sort of thing over large numbers of folks to see if it actually works. And I think that's what's lacking in the metaphysical world. And that's why you would have very few people, at least in the scientific world, believe it, because there just is not.
There's no evidence, there's no proof.
Yeah, there's
no
proof.
Testing.
You have to do one of those double-blind studies, just like drug companies do.
Right. So to continue that line of thinking, though, crystals do have a frequency. And they have a frequency that can actually be manufactured to oscillate over a wide range of frequencies, from a few kilohertz to several hundred megahertz, which is a large spectrum of frequency. Mm-hmm. They also vibrate in reaction to external forces like temperature, light, or vibration, right? So there is something going on inside of the crystal. There is an oscillation happening. There's a frequency. There is a vibration happening. There's a reaction happening with the crystal and a stone. Am I correct here?
Yes, actually, one of the exhibits I have is it's on quartz oscillators.
Which actually, the stones create sound.
Yes, if you could hear it.
But crystals actually create a sound. We might not be able to hear it on a visit, but they are creating a sound. This is just one of the things for me that really brought me into this direction of this industry and into mineralogy, and being like, this is insane. This is really crazy. Like, these are things that you just wouldn't know. You look at a rock, people walk past a rock, they pick up a rock, it's just a rock. But there's so much going on inside of the rock. And so I think that we wound up in this place of associating metaphysical properties or energetic properties with the stone because it's coming from this place of the frequency, the vibration, the reaction that the stone is having, the fact that it emits a frequency that can be measured. So do you think that those frequencies and those variations can actually have an effect on a person?
I guess I forget the phenomenon they call it is, but some of the people, U.S. diplomats who have been subjected to radio frequencies that they can't quite figure out, obviously it adversely affects their health. You might step back down one degree is that the chemical properties of a lot of minerals have effects on people. You have mercury, which, that sort of thing. People, of course, have long used Epsom salts. So that's sort of a one step down from the metaphysical, but still the case the minerals were used for beneficial or not so beneficial effects. In that case, the chemical properties were affecting or can affect health.
Interesting you brought that up, because one of the things that I was going to mention and that I tell people frequently is that going back into the late 1800s, when mining silver mining, gold mining was happening, copper, or when mining was actually booming, and it was the thing where everyone was running to get there, find a claim, stake a claim, and start mining. All the people down in the mines who were mining, they were using these little headlamps at the time. There was no electricity down there. Everyone was using lanterns or headlamps or whatever it may be. And actually the miners who were going down for their period of time that they were supposed to be working would be down there with their lamp. Very limited amount of time on those lamps, by the way. Didn't mean that the lamp was going to last you, or the candle that you might have wasn't going to last you the whole time you were down there. But the really crazy thing that I think people don't know is that during lunchtime, all of the people down there were having lunch together, and after a long time, they started getting very sick. People down in the mine started getting very sick, and they kind of associated this with minor sickness or whatever the terminology is around it. But actually, they weren't sick from being in the mines or being down in the mines. They were sick from eating peaches and beans out of lead-lined cans. Is this something you're familiar with?
Not particularly for miners.
Lead poisoning.
Yeah, lead poisoning. There are sort of a large number of poisonings going on. I mean, you have the mercury, somewhat differently, but it's a physical problem, is of course the asbestos type things. Also the dust itself, silicosis. So clearly the minerals are interacting chemically or physically with the body.
So being a miner back in the early 1800s was a really hard job, and also a very hazardous job for your health.
Yeah, there was a recent episode on TV where they went to a slate mine in Wales. One of the things they mentioned, which, they had like anywhere up to 60 deaths a year in this one slate mine. It was obviously the dust type stuff. So, but of course, that was the time when slate was the main roofing material. So It was a very large business. But I was just surprised that they had so many deaths in just a slate mine.
Bringing us back to the idea that crystals are vibrating and reacting to air and noise and things like that, I feel like this. I'm wondering if you've ever had an experience like this between yourself and a crystal. Have you ever experienced some sort of metaphysical or spiritual connection with the rock yourself?
No, I was just trying to think about in terms of trying to just be careful. I mean, I have a collection of native elements, and of course you have to be careful and I nice and isolate the mercury, that sort of thing.
Do you have the crystal that you found when you were 13 still? Right? You have that crystal. You have a relationship with that rock. There's more than just this is a rock I found. There is an emotional attachment to that rock. Tell me no.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously sentimentality there.
Right. So, I mean, does that qualify us or lead us in a direction where we can kind of comprehend this understanding of maybe there is more to the rock than just the mineralogy and the geology behind it?
Well, I think at some of these mineral shows where a lot of folks come in to buy all the displays, a lot of this material that you're wholesaling, I don't think they're thinking in terms of metaphysical stuff. They just see something that attracts them or they like.
But do you think it goes beyond visual?
clearly it's not everything. In other words, they may pick up something, they maybe like the color, but they like the color of that particular one as opposed to all the other ones that have that color type stuff. But clearly there's an attraction there. And I'm not sure what you would call it, but and they invariably go away with something they've bought.
Well, I've had many clients come into my warehouses and, put their hands over the crystal and be like, "Oh my God, the vibration of this rock is so insane." I've literally had people hold pieces of moldavite or meteorite, impact glass, tektites, and be like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna have a heart attack." I've had people like walk into the warehouse and say, "Oh my God, I'm gonna throw up right now. I need to walk out of here. The vibration is too," and all of these things. But at the same time, I do understand that crystals are oscillating and that there are vibrations and frequencies coming from these things, and if a person is hypersensitive to that, they might actually be experiencing that. Do you think that that's a possible thing?
Experiencing something. I mean, I've had people come and look at the things we have for the exhibits, and they'll light. I remember one particular woman in Tucson came back several times to touch one of the things. I mean, there were a lot of different things, some more attractive than others, but she alighted on one that I would not say was the most attractive, colorful one, and came back several times. Because normally the metaphysical people are rather shy about saying something when they come to the exhibit of the Mineralogical Society of America. But if you do, and she was very expressive, she really was getting something from this particular material.
I mean, with all of your years and expertise and seeing this happen, does it actually ever pique your interest and say, what, is there something to this?
Well, I mean, obviously I see it and I'm curious. And, if there is somebody undertakes that double-blind study, it would be very interesting to see what's going on. I haven't really explored or talked much to these folks because they generally will come in to ask more of a mineralogic aspect of the question, that sort of thing. They bought something and they want to make sure they weren't taken, is this quartz? Is this, a piece of malachite? It would have been nice that maybe it happens again for the woman who really came back for that. It was one of the minerals that are used in Tesla's electric batteries. And it was just an ore, so a mineral or an ore rock. So, I mean, it wasn't anything overly spectacular or anything like
Right.
that.
She was
But
just
she
she
alighted
just was
on it.
feeling something from it.
She alighted on it for whatever reason.
Yeah. Again, for me, on the other side of it, I do find it very interesting and I do find it intriguing. And I wish that there was a study around it, and I wish there was more thought-provoking information around it. The issue is that there are two sides of the fence, and I feel like as time goes on, the two sides of the fence get farther away from each other. Again, it's like people like you who are showing up at these local shows and still providing people with that aspect that is quite honestly very hard to maintain in this day and age, where everything is social media and quick and fast and easy, YouTube. And I feel like the presence there is not necessarily people like yourself with the expertise, with the actual knowledge. Because the thing is that if I'm getting into the crystal industry or the business and I'm going to the Tucson Gem Show, if you see the people that are busy at those gem shows, they're not the people that you would expect to be busy. People like yourself or people who have been in the industry for 40, 50, 60 years who are specializing in a very specific, their booths are typically empty. And there's many times like I'm like, wow, this person's booth is empty. I get to go and now have a 15-minute, 20-minute conversation with this person because they're just sitting there. And I've ran into some amazing, amazing people with wealth of information and got to pick their brains because they're kind of just sitting there.
Well, I me's quite clear when you go to these. The only reason there are these shows and they're economically viable is because of the whatever what did you call it, the metaphysical aspects or the people who cater to that. I mean, that's clearly it. And then the rest of us are sort of wedged in between that. But clearly the economic incentive for holding the local shows is not for mineralogy per se. It's a little different for mineral clubs. They also tend to be like more like the mineralogist or the scientist. be dismissive of it, but they realize that it's an economic and draw of the public. And so they sort of cater to it.
So there's a coexistence happening there. There's a mutual understanding and a mutual agreement. But again, it's one of those things where it's there was a gentleman that I met from Colombia who was actually mining Colombian quartz, and I did an interview with him to some degree for just a small snippet, and the depth of information that he had, the wealth of information, not just around crystals and minerals, but also life experience was just so vast and so much to learn from somebody like that. And I feel like we live in a world now where the people who actually have this wealth of information are kind of being sidestepped for someone who's a little bit more visually appealing or somebody who's speaking in more of a relatable way to them. And I think that it's causing a tremendous amount of trouble in our societal standards at this point. I'm not trying to bring you into that narrative, but at the same time, do you see that as well?
Yes, I mean, there will only be a select group of folks who are attracted to our exhibits, but over the time, I'm learning to have something that they relate to, and therefore they will stop and look further. For example, I'm trying to, the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show next year's theme is green. So I've tried to figure out, okay, what we're going to do. So I decided I would do something called serpentinization. But anyway, what it is you take something like olivine or peridot, you alter it, and you end up with serpentine. So that's the serpentinizing process. And from a physical or just a collector's standpoint, you have the olivine, the peridot, and you also have the various serpentine minerals that can be cut and polished and that sort of thing. But one step beyond that, and that's what I'm trying to, let's say, build on, is that that process of serpentinization is now connected with the origins of life on Earth.
Really?
Because
How so?
when that serpentization occurs, it breaks down water into hydrogen and oxygen. So it may be that some of the early oxygen was actually a result of the serpentization. But also when it produces that hydrogen, it combines with other things to apparently form sort of precursor amino acids.
Are you serious? Wow, that's crazy. I was not privy to this.
So it's only something that's happened in the last year or two. I'm still trying to figure out because it's not quite clear what type of organic compounds it produces. But it's something that would occur at the mid-oceanic ridges where the plates in mid-ocean are things. So it occurs deep sea. And a few people have suggested, gee, this might be a place where you could think about the origin of life as a result of this serpentinization process. The other downside of that is that if we find some amino acids on places like Mars, it could be produced just by serpentinization, so it may not indicate life.
Wow, this is
Anyway,
really interesting.
that will take a while to sort out. However, you see, by having green on green and having a big chunk of olivine, a big chunk of serpentine, you then can say, this is how it formed, the process, the geologic process. And oh, by the way, this produces in the process of types of things that might lead to, or at least promote the appearance of life on Earth and elsewhere.
Super cool. Where are you going to be located in Tucson?
The club is very nice and gives MSA and MAC, the Mineralogical Society of Canada, space, a booth on the Galleria. You've been up there, and it's a very nice space in a way, is that because that's where they sell the tickets and people congregate early. So anybody who buys a ticket to go to the Tucson Mineral Show, the main show, passes by our booth one way or another. So we get a fair amount of traffic up there.
One of the words that we hear a lot now in the industry that I think people don't properly understand, they just know the term. And I'm wondering if you can help us understand this term a little bit better. It's called a pocket. So could you please explain to us what a pocket actually is?
Of course, you get pockets in sedimentary rocks. You can get them in igneous rocks. It's just an open space. And depending the rock it occurs in is actually how it occurs. I presume most of those pockets where you get the amethyst in Brazil and Uruguay is a result of basalt flows generating gases either by the groundwater or whatever, and all of a sudden having this sort of gas volume, and then eventually you pocket. In sedimentary rocks, it's probably more like a digestive process, is that you're digesting organic material and generating gas, and it opens up a pocket.
There's so much amazing and intriguing information here around the backside story of the stone that I just wish people were just a little bit more 50-50 in that world. And this way, we wouldn't wind up in the position that we're in where the endless misinformation that's out there is just wild spreading. I don't want to bring on people who are going to add to the misinformation. I want to speak to people who are going to help us get to actual practical and fundamental information, just like you explaining a pocket. And because people use that word all the time and they really don't even understand what that means. It's just a word that's circulating without real understanding, which is essentially an open space that's formed within a rock where, like you said, water, which is also a mineral, right? Most people don't understand water is a mineral itself, right? Petroleum is a mineral. Ores are different types of mineral, and the pocket is essentially the breeding grounds for the minerals to grow and crystallize.
I've just learned over going to particularly the local shows, but also the Tucson show, where you encounter the general public, that if you have something that sort of intrigues them because they recognize it as part of their life, you can then engage them more in a conversation, or they'll spend more time looking at what's going on. It's just like one of the newer exhibits we have is on a pencil. And for the pencil, we were given by a past president of MSA, I was given a huge piece of graphite. It's this thing that's this big. It's nothing but pure graphite vein. I also have a piece of kaolinite with it, big piece of like clay. And people are attracted to the graphite. Everybody has to touch it, so everybody goes away with smudgy hands. But then you'd say, talk about, this is what you're in a pencil. Oh, yeah, graphite pencil, blah, blah, blah. But then I point out that, well, the other thing that's here is kaolinite, because the, quote, lead in a pencil is actually a graphite-bearing ceramic. And so they combine the graphite with a kaolinite, fire it, and that's where you get your pencil. And at that point, they'll then stay a couple more minutes to read through the description of what it is, pencil. And they'll say, but gee, you didn't know that. Then you can tell them, well, depending on the ratio of graphite to the amount of kaolinite, that's how you get the different hardnesses of pencil.
Yeah, I really love that you're putting practicality and familiarity around your world, and that is a really great way to bring people in and give out a little bit more of a proper information around things. Speaking of going just a little bit further, I wanted to ask you, so what is the Mohs scale?
A fellow named Mohs realized that different things have different hardnesses. It was before you could really quantify how hard something was, but he realized that, well, this is harder than that, and that's harder than this, and that sort of thing. So he figured it would be useful to have a scale of material that's commonly available, or material that's commonly available. And then he just sort of put them in order of, increasing what he considered hardness. The Mohs scale is more or less linear for the first 9, and then of course diamond is sort of off the chart. But it's just a very useful sort of thing.
I mean, it's one of the first pieces of information that you see associated with minerals, and I'm wondering, why is it so relevant?
It's one of these things that you can very quickly figure out or identify in material. Another one is heft, which relates to density. When someone picks up a piece of galena and a piece of coal, that's the first thing they realize is, hey, these things weigh differently. So they realize they're different stuff.
But I think also one of the things that's really relevant, especially now for people, which I feel like there's a lot less facetors, cutters, people like that, but the Mohs scale can actually help you identify what stones are easier to cut than the other stones based on their hardness to softness, right? So cutting a piece of fluorite is going to be immensely easier than cutting a piece of agate.
Yeah. Although you might be unhappy cutting the fluorite because it's so easily scratched So you might want to go something intermediate.
I'd like to ask you another a little. Now we're going to get a little bit deeper into the water, which is what is a pseudomorph?
You have a particular mineral that becomes altered, and the shape of the original material mineral does not change. We were talking earlier about serpentization. In other words, taking olivine or peridot, and then altering it into serpentine. If you do it carefully enough, you'll keep the original shape of the peridot or the olivine. And so you say, gee, this is the mineral serpentine, but it has the form of this peridot or olivine. Therefore, it's a false form.
Yeah, they're becoming more relevant now, and the word is starting to come up in the industry. People are starting to become aware of it, and essentially the description that I'm looking for, or kind of offering for the layman, is that essentially what you happen is there's a host mineral, and it basically becomes another mineral, right? So let's just say you have like limonite and muscovite, and it becomes, I don't know, chalcopyrite. Let's just say that there, or actually now one of the things that I'm seeing now that's kind of coming out that's common is gypsum turning into goethite.
For a true pseudomorph, it has to keep the shape of the original mineral.
Right. So pseudomorph describes the fact that one mineral was replaced with another mineral but maintained its actual shape.
Yes.
But it's almost like an invasion, isn't it, of one mineral invading another?
I guess so. I guess so. But
Or using it as a host. But how is it that one mineral can actually trump another mineral? Or decompose that other mineral and take its place?
well, in the case of the olivine, serpentine, olivine is a high temperature mineral that doesn't play well with water. It likes a nice, dry, hot environment. So when it encounters the surface of the earth, low temperature and lots of water running around, it's just not stable. And so it will alter and become replaced by, let's say, serpentine. As it belongs, it maintains the original shape. It's a pseudomorph. If it doesn't, then it's just an alteration or replacement.
Yeah, but is it actually a replacement of a mineral that's existing in that habitat, or is it actually just a transformation that happens?
No, in the case of most pseudomorphs, it's a replacement. So
It's a very transformative process that's happening inside of the mineral. I think it's again going back to this idea that there are spiritual properties or metaphysical properties, which again, I'm not going to advertise that. I'm never going to use that to sell something to somebody. But I do think again that there's a lot of things happening in the mineral kingdom, in the inanimate kingdom especially, that really can kind of resonate with us in a certain direction and tell us, hey, there's more going on than meets the eye. Basically based off of these kinds of processes, no?
Well, from my standpoint, from what I saw, this Andalusite silmonite transition, it told me about the geologic history and evolution of the rocks. So there was information tied up in that particular transformation.
But that transformation is not very far off from our kinds of transformation or our evolution. I mean, again, different kingdoms, different processes, but still the result is similar. There is an evolution. There is this reoccurring factor that happens. There is this similarity of form between the process of being a rock to some degree and also being a human. Am I wildly going left right now?
You're looking at the other side of alterations and transformations.
Well, that's usually how I try to get people to lean into something that's a little bit more practical and sustainable. Like rose quartz. Essentially, rose quartz begins as blue because it has traces of dumortierite. That eventually that goes away and it becomes more pink.
I guess there are two types of rose quartz, but the ones that are thick colored by inclusions would have some sort of transformation type process going on. I guess more in that case, exsolution.
I'm doing my best to work my both worlds here and oversimplify concepts, but at the same time, it does go from this blue to this pink. That is an occurrence that happens with rose quartz. That's why you also have now blue rose quartz coming into the market more frequently. I don't know if you've seen blue rose quartz or heard about this narrative.
No, although I'd be interested, I'm trying to put together things on blue quartz, which I probably do have a question for you on that one. But I do want to comment because I did see it. I do like your Tom's sections on, is it a trade name or a mineral name? I thought
Yeah.
that was very well
Oh,
done.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So also his pop quizzes and things like that. Since you do a lot with the mines, this is sold as blue quartz. But as far as I can tell, it's from Brazil.
It is
And
from
it,
Brazil.
and what I've been trying to figure out or learn somebody who tells me why it's blue. Somewhere I saw somebody, a geologist, comment that really what it is, it's a blue quartzite. In other words, the quartz itself is not blue, but there's something else there, blue. But with all your connections, it would be really nice to know exactly what's making it blue, what what it is they found, because the only occurrence or description you get is, Brazil. Well, I really can't do much investigation of that.
Well, right now, what's happening with this particular blue quartz is that there's a very large connection now to aventurine. So people are right now in between. Is it blue quartz? Is it blue aventurine? It is a quartz.
Oh yeah, it's obvious quartz, and it's obviously quartzite.
Yeah. What's making it blue? I'm not totally sure. I would ask you that question more than you than you.
If I still had access to analytical facilities, I could probably determine it. But
Yeah, I can definitely ask. I have not asked that question, but I will ask that question for you. And if I get an answer, I will definitely let you know. But again, I think it's interesting that you're bringing that onto the stage right now because, again, there is a really wide range narrative around that being called blue aventurine. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this new stone that's kind of become more popular over the last 2 years, which is what people are now calling aquatine lemurian, which is essentially a blue onyx that has calcite inclusions. It's coming out of Argentina. Are you familiar with this?
I've seen the name, but I haven't had a physical piece to look at, but I've seen the name.
Right. And I've had several people debate that it's actually not onyx, that it's actually a calcite. Um, and people get very upset about it. I mean, from my understanding and everyone's understanding, the miner's perspective, it's actually onyx. It's not calcite. The issue is that there are calcite inclusions inside of the onyx, and therefore you're running into these situations now where you have people that learn some basic information without really fact checking it and then run with that information. I don't know if you're familiar with this and how this happens, where people are like, oh, because out of the Congo, you're getting tremendous amounts of what people are calling natural citrine, but essentially it is heat treated smoky quartz. And the thing that people are so upset about is that you heated the amethyst, you destroyed the amethyst, this beautiful amethyst, you destroyed it by heating it, but you're okay with the fact that you have heated smoky quartz, and that's natural citrine. And it's one of those narratives that's just blowing my mind, even still to today. I'm trying to abandon it and leave it behind me because trying to explain this to people is like they feel that they know something. And once somebody feels that they know something, they're going to take that information and it becomes absolute. Just like the gentleman that you met that told you that, he believes that, but we don't believe that. Again, you can't alter someone's belief once they make it absolute. And it's one of the things that is extremely difficult in this industry. And for me, being in that middle ground where I want to be transparent and I want to try to educate as much as I possibly can, but at the same time, I am a wholesale distributor and I do need to sell the material and I do need to offer the material. And when I come to somebody and say, hey, this is a blue onyx, and they're like, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, oh, it's aquatine lemurian. They're like, oh, I love aquatine lemurian. And that's where we are now.
Of course, the problem is also onyx is actually composed of the mineral calcite.
Right.
So
So again,
it's a different habit of calcite, and that's where people begin to get confused is when you're looking at different habits of things. I mean, for all the varieties of silica, quartz, and agates and all that, I mean, you're just looking at various habits of all this stuff.
right. So would you essentially say that saying the onyx is calcite is actually both are kind of correct in their own way?
Yes. If you're looking at it from a strictly mineralogy, in other words, if you say, okay, we're going to grind it up, put it on an X-ray machine and look at the diffraction pattern, we will come up with the mineral calcite. But from a geologic standpoint, if you're interested how the stuff forms, looking and saying, oh, this is onyx, then you're beginning to think about hot springs or cave deposits. In other words, you're getting some geologic information out of it. By just somebody saying, I have a piece of calcite, doesn't tell me much geologically. I mean, it could occur in an igneous rock, a metamorphic rock, a sedimentary rock, a clam. It's not telling me
Right.
anything.
And that's kind of was my perspective too, which is what when I originally described it to you, I was saying that, it is a calcite inclusion. That it's not just like a blue eye. Again, I'm not here to go into the depths of mineralogy with people. I wanted to get the basics, scratch the surface with you right now. Let's get back into some more fundamental questions. What determines the value of a mineral?
Different types of value. Sometimes it has an intrinsic value for what it contains. I would like to find lots of iridium minerals. I'd be very rich, even better than gold.
You would be.
So, something like gold or something has an intrinsic value that everybody appreciates. Some materials are valuable because of their properties. Before they began to grow quartz, they, of course, had to fly in all the quartz from Brazil, very carefully get out pieces of it to use in quartz oscillators for radios. So in that case, it's the physical properties that are important to it. The other is the aesthetics of it. Obviously, this is where gemology comes into play. Also for aesthetics of mineral collecting. The other reason I'd like to have things that are fairly massive is when you put them out on the table, people can pick them up. They're not behind glass. And it makes a bigger impression on people if they could pick something up and hold it, as opposed to looking at it behind glass or touch it like the graphite.
Well, for instance, let me kind of specify my question a little bit more. Like, so let's just say that I'm going to a local mineral show, and I am seeing, I don't know, rose quartz going for $5 a pound, and then I'm seeing, let's just say, like natural ametrine or something like that, which is going for like $3, $4 a gram. Where do you think this difference in price is actually coming from? Like, what determines the value? Like, if I'm going to a local gem show and I'm looking to buy from myself, why is it that one thing is really cheap and another thing is really expensive? From that perspective.
In that case, your example there would be just how common it is. Ametrine is not very common.
Right.
Whereas rose quartz, they're mining pegmatites full of stuff by the ton.
Right.
So the rarity comes in. Of course, some things can be very rare and having no interest. On the other side of the room, I have a piece of roeblingite. Washington Roebling was a big benefactor of the committee, so I thought it'd be nice to have a piece of roeblingite. I doubt there's a great clamor for roeblingite. So it's just a rarity, but desirability.
I've also, why I asked you the question of, what determines the value of a mineral, it was more because, the thing that people are starting to understand now, because again, I've been in the industry for a long time. I would consider myself an authority on classification of material, meaning that my ability to grade quality, I think, is top notch. I teach people that. I try to explain to people how to grade it, especially employees who we have to unpack 100 kilos, let's just say, of amethyst. What am I looking for is something that's very hard to explain to somebody, especially a younger kid who doesn't understand quality control. And one of the things that, like, again, if you took a normal person, a layman, and you said, hey, find me the best piece of material here in this lot, they're most likely going to pick you the most aesthetically pleasing piece. Right. And so one of the things that's interesting now is that aesthetics is really what's determining value to some degree. How do you know what's the best quality amethyst? Whatever's the darkest. That is not true. That is not a true statement. But it is, if it's true to you, then it becomes true to somebody. So that's really where I was going with that question of what determines the value, because I think now people are going strictly off of aesthetics, not even rarity or any of those things. It's just more like, what's the prettiest thing?
Well, I think for a true collector, the rarity will come in to it.
But not the layman.
Yeah, not the layman.
I wish I could focus more on mineralogy and finding really good minerals. And, I've been approached by many people before to buy out large mineral collections. People from mineralogy societies have approached me to buy out large collections. And the sad news is that, I'm sorry, your collection is worth what you're saying it's worth, but I will never recoup that funds from no one cares about the collection that you have. It's so horrible to say that, but at the same time, I understand what you have there. I would love to have what you have, but I'm coming out of pocket then for it, just so you know. Usually they're $100,000 plus collections we're talking about here. We're not talking about a $5,000 collection. We're talking about $100,000 plus. I was recently shown a fossil collection and actually a fluorescent mineral collection, and the gentleman wanted around $600,000 for it. And it was totally worth it. It was absolutely worth it. He had stuff in there that was like, but nobody knows what that is. So I'm never going to be able to recoup the funds on it because the world is not going in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I'm different than almost everybody, or even maybe many mineral collectors, certainly in professionals, is that if I look at something, I want to know or think, can this tell me a story? I mean, one of the recent I got recently, it's as ugly as sin. Let's see here.
Is it shungite? Is it carbon?
It's a piece of fluorite. It's fluorite that's become irradiated. So it's from a uranium mine. This one is in Canada. They also get them in Germany. But the irradiation, as it turns out, destroys the fluorite structure. I'm not sure what happens to the calcium, but the fluorine ends up in little bugs or pockets. The fluorine accumulates in little bugs or pockets or pores in the fluorite. So this is an occurrence of, you have people who collect native elements, copper, gold, whatever. This contains bugs of native fluorine. And actually, if you break it, it smells and stinks. The German name for it, I think, is stinkstone.
Where did you get that? You got a guy? You got a guy?
I saw it on Etsy. And sometimes, I guess some of these dealers, just like you, they buy a collection and they end up with stuff that they really can't get rid of. And so they put it on. It's just like another thing I bought recently. Oh, a big, massive molybdenite.
Wow, that's a huge one.
Yeah, it's I think what it is it's a guy who deals in jewelry and gems and things like that. And probably this came from collections. And I had sold it for a couple of years, and he was charging over $100 for it, which was out of my price range. And then eventually, I guess he got tired of it and put it on sale. I tried to buy it, and all of a sudden it was taken off sale. And then I guess he figured, well, okay, so I put it back on sale. So I got it for $50.
But here's the thing, Dr. Speer. It's interesting that, as you're showing that rock, I couldn't sell that rock to somebody for $50 if I wanted to, and it's really probably closer to a $200 to $300 rock is what it is retail value. But again, someone in a collection is going to have that rock and say, okay, I'm going to value this rock at $150 or $100. I wouldn't be able to get $50 for the thing. So it makes buying these collections really hard nowadays because the value is there in those collections. It's just the problem is that the resellability of it is not there.
Yeah. So, I mean,
It took someone like you to buy that rock only once it was priced, keystoned. Then did they sell that rock. But I'm someone who would buy a rock like that. I have a question for you, which I think a lot of people don't understand because fossils are everywhere. People are dealing in fossils, but people don't understand the process of fossilization. And I'm wondering if you could just lightly explain to us what's the process of fossilization?
Well, there are different types of fossilization. You can have an imprint on, let's say, an animal running around and going across a mud flat. And then soon after that, it storms and it gets covered up. And all of a sudden, that imprint is preserved. And so you have a fossil imprint. There is a quarry south of here in Manassas where you have dinosaur tracks. That's exactly it. The other thing you see when you see that trackway is, of course, the mud cracks, which is another type of fossil. You can have sort of mineralization. And in that case, it's been remineralized. So it's probably largely still a phosphate of some sort. But anyway, you just had remineralization. Sometimes, and I like the ones where you get a fossil that has been replaced by pyrite. And so you have something like a little octopus or something. So, I mean, that case, that's replacement. Of course, you also have the fragments themselves. I mean, obviously, the coal here is actually a fossil. It's just,
Again, leading into why I'm asking you to that question, which is that people's definition of a fossil, or the standard layman's understanding of a fossil, is okay, there was a bone from a dinosaur, it was sitting in the ground, and the bone decayed. In that space that was left, created essentially a pocket from the decay of the bone, and in came the mineral infrastructure and agatized the, because right, the fossil is not the bone. When you have a dinosaur bone, it's actually not the actual bone of a dinosaur.
no, it's not. It's just, in that case, it'd be a replacement of the bone. Um,
But that's most people's basic understanding of a fossil, is that it was, something that was there, it decomposed, and then the space where the decomposition happened was filled with another mineral,
yeah.
typically like agate. But that's not the case. That's not that's way overly simplifying what a fossil actually is.
Of course, you then also have the fossils that are actually still the original material. I mean, the coastal
Bison,
plain.
bison teeth, right? Bear tooth, like you can get teeth, especially. No,
Yeah, and also shells. I mean, you can get exogyrus shells from the coastal plain of Maryland. I mean, you go over the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal and go along the side of it. And of course, you get a lot of these exogyrus cells. It's a extinct oyster. So I collected that 40 some years ago, but it's just an exogyrus shell. It's a extinct type of fossilized oyster, but it's still the original sort of material. So in that case, it's just preserved. That's my dinosaur tooth.
that's so cool. So fossilization, essentially, if you were going to generalize it to a 5-year-old child, how would you, if someone came to you and said, Dr. Speer, 5-year-old kid comes up, Dr. Speer, what's a fossil?
I guess I'd have to find a better word for it, but it's an indication of past life. It's just a trace of past life and can take many forms.
It's a marker. Would you say marker is a decent word for it?
Yeah, yeah. An indication of past life. It's a remnant. It's a leftover from a
It's a
past life.
residue.
Yeah.
Can you explain the process of wood becoming petrified?
Petra is stone. So what you're doing is you're talking about something becoming a stone. So that if you have a log that is buried in soil or sediment or whatever, and then you have a lot of sort of fluids come along and replace what's there, the wood that's there, and precipitate out some sort of mineral, then this log has become a stone, or it's become, quote, petrified.
How would you explain that to, again, let's go to the 5-year-old, because unfortunately, I think that even though we're all adults, we're still need to be educated in the degree that you would educate a 5-year-old.
I would probably say something along the lines that the animal or the part of the animal or whatever was left has turned into stone.
Right. So it was organic material, right, not stone, that became stone.
Yes, it's the probably make it more dramatic is the dead animal or dead animal parts was replaced by stone.
So what you're saying is that fossils and petrified stones are one and the same.
Yeah, yeah.
People take petrified, like a petrified thing and a fossil, and put them on two ends of the spectrum. But actually, petrified wood is actually fossilized wood.
Yes.
Same thing with coral, right? Petrified coral is actually fossilized coral, and so on and so forth. So again, I was kind of to come into this.
I think petrified got too tied up and too closely tied with wood.
Yes, it did.
So that it's otherwise you could refer to almost all fossils as being petrified, whatever.
Right.
So,
Well, now people are starting to become familiar with fulgurite. So now we're going in this direction where people are, getting their hands on petrified lightning, and people are now starting to understand that, oh, it's not just wood.
yeah.
Yeah, but again, this is very basic information that is so far lost to the layman who is a collector, and it's again, it's one of those things where it's like we're not trying to insinuate anything other than, here's the information that you might be lacking. And that's one of the things I'm trying to do is oversimplify and deliver information to the layman. I have a couple more questions, quick questions for you. One of them is around Lemurian quartz. Are you familiar with Lemurian quartz?
Not really. I've seen the name.
Okay, because this is a huge thing now on my side of the fence is Lemurian, and everyone doesn't know the definition of a Lemurian quartz, what a Lemurian quartz is, how to define it, how it's actually proper Lemurian, because sometimes you have partial Lemurian. Lemurian is associated with Lemuria, although the Lemurian quartz that's coming out is typically not found anywhere but Brazil or Tibet or Colombia. And the term Lemurian quartz actually refers to 3 of the sides of a crystal being etched with those little lines, the little striations, and 3 of them actually having clear windows. So proper Lemurian actually forms in that way, where there are 3 sides of it that actually have little etchings on it, and then 3 sides of the 6 sides are perfect windows. I was going to ask you if you understand how that process occurs or why that a process occurs.
Well, actually, I didn't know that term for it, but actually I have some of those. We look at it in terms of symmetry, big on symmetry. When I first got to graduate school, the fellow G.V. Gibbs was really heavily into symmetry. But quartz, even though it has, let's say, the 6 things there, is actually trigonal. It actually has a 3-fold axis there. What that means is all 6 of those top sort of faces or terminations are not symmetrically equivalent. That is, if you could really look down to see what the crystal structure is, it's at surface, 3 of them would have one appearance. The other 3 would have a different appearance.
Right.
That means that they have different chemistries or they'll react differently to changes in chemistry.
Essentially two formations going on at the same time.
Well, if you're looking at the crystal structure in 2 different directions, one way you're looking at it where maybe it looks like this.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, you have 2 processes occurring at the same time.
One will be probably more susceptible to dissolution than the other. And so the 3 that have the etches are exposing the structure in such a way that it is more susceptible to dissolution than the other 3 faces. So that's what you're looking at.
So essentially a Lemurian quartz is a dual process that's kind of going on at the same time, where the trigonal effects are happening in 2 different ways.
Well, of course, the quartz itself has 3-fold symmetry or trigonal symmetry to begin with. And the effect is the fact that the different faces just react differently to the chemical environment. So that's what you're looking at. So you need both in order to actually have that effect or see it on a crystal. It's
a very mind-boggling kind of concept there. I wish I could actually dive deeper into that. Again, I think that's enough to scratch the surface, which is like, how did that crystal become that way? It's because there's actually 2 3-sided situations going on at the same time. And these 3 sides actually happen to process this way. And the other 3 sides happen to process that way. Yeah. Right? Again, if we're explaining it to a 5-year-old.
Yeah, there are other effects you can look at if you look very closely to see the quartz actually has a 3-fold axis and not a 6-fold axis. So that
right, because then you can also wind up with things. I'm not sure if you're familiar with etching or record keepers or these kinds of narratives around it, where you get those little triangles on the outside of a quartz, which is what people are calling record keepers. Actually, record keepers are a lot more complicated than just the little triangles, but you ever see the little triangles and like the little rectangle shapes that form on the etching on the outside of a crystal?
Yeah. But also that's the same reason when you talked about the material that has different colors, the quartz that has different colors in 3 things, it's showing the same effect.
Last kind of question before my rapid fire questions is, we're now seeing the word phantom coming up in the community relatively frequently, phantom, but I'm seeing it being misused widely. Could you please explain to us what a phantom is?
A classic phantom is a growth phenomena. The crystal is growing, and then something happens so that all of a sudden on the crystal faces, it's coated with something or whatever. It's some sort of marker. And then the crystal begins to grow again, and it
Right.
grows over that marker and incorporates it. And it can happen several times. I have a nice quartz crystal that has nice phantom of, I guess,
Layers. You can actually see the layers as
yeah,
they go up.
yeah.
Which one time someone was asking me about this, and this was my understanding, and I'm gonna iterate that to you because maybe I'm wrong. Uh, let's just say that there's a way that water gets into a pocket, right? And the water is carrying with it whatever X amount of minerals with it. And there's a blockage that prevents that water from flowing into the pocket. Then that blockage is dislodged and the flow begins again. Is that a way that we can actually wind up with phantoms?
Well, yeah, I mean, you stop growth for a while under in certain conditions, and then all of a sudden you've unblocked it so that all of a sudden it can continue growing the way it had previously.
Right, and I feel like that's kind of the most simplistic understanding of how that might occur. I'm not saying that that's the absolute way it occurs, but one way to understand how that would happen is that there is a flow of material to a pocket. The flow of the material is disrupted to some degree. Then the disruption is no longer there. The flow begins again. And that could happen over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, thus lining you with many different layers, many different phantoms. But it's also my understanding that sometimes secondary minerals get formed, especially like in quartz or with calcite in quartz, where you have calcium coming into a pocket as well and forming at the same time quartz is forming. And you wind up with these minerals forming together. And then you get into things like apophyllite forming with zeolites and basalt and chalcedony and all of these really crazy, interesting mineral combinations that you wind up with. And my last question for you was, how do we wind up with these vast mineral combinations that are really actually kind of complicated to get to? For example, I have pieces that have there's something called Super 7. Are you familiar with Super 7?
I guess I have 7 different minerals.
Right, yeah. It's an amethyst that is actually cacoxenite, iron inclusion, hematite amethyst, which everyone actually doesn't have Super 7. Everyone's selling a 5 mineral based amethyst as 7 mineral based. It's across the market right now. There is like no Super 7 on the market, but everyone's selling more of a 5 based mineral as that. But my question is how do you get something that complex where you have 7 or 6 different minerals happening at the same time?
Well, in that case, we get back to that petrology, which we talked about a long time ago,
Yeah.
the study of rock. A rock is made up of many different minerals. Most rocks will have maybe 4 or 5 major minerals, in other words, different amounts. And then they may have 5 or more accessory minerals. So all of a sudden you have a system that you have maybe 10 minerals all forming or crystallizing at the same time. Maybe take a simple example. A basalt, like the lava that comes out of Kilauea. Okay, it came out as liquid basalt, and then it would begin to crystallize. Well, probably it began to crystallize a plagioclase feldspar. It probably already arrived with olivine, or peridot. It probably would then begin to crystallize a pyroxene. At the same time, it's probably crystallizing iron oxides, probably magnetite. Basalts are not famous for accessory minerals, but it could have some sort of, let's say, if it got along somewhere, maybe some sort of zircon mineral, which is, that sort of thing. So all of a sudden, you're having a rock where you have 5 or 6 or more minerals crystallizing forming at the same time in the presence of each other.
Which is actually a
Uh,
lot crazier of a concept than people might actually understand.
Yeah, because generally you're used to something like people making sugar crystals. You dissolve sugar and water, precipitate out, and you're just getting the sugar out. What they should probably do is add other things like alum and all that sort of stuff, and then they'd end up with a rock. Add salt,
Right.
add sugar, add alum, all that sort of stuff.
I got a couple of rapid fire questions for you. What is your favorite mineral?
Titanite. It's also known as sphene.
Yes.
The French call it sphene, Germans call it titanite. It would probably be a history book. I'm interested in sort of archaeology type stuff. And so the origins of civilization, that sort of thing in the Middle East.
What is your favorite trait found in humanity?
I guess you could probably hope for kindness.
What is your least favorite trait in humanity?
Untrustworthiness.
Dishonesty?
Yeah.
If you could give somebody one piece of advice, what would it be?
To be honest with yourself and others, life will go a whole lot faster and easier.
If you could give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
If I was able to give advice to my younger self, it would be try to be more outgoing.
Literally an honor to have this time and for you to take this time out of your life and spend it with me. My appreciation is immense. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. I'll see you next time, and I'll definitely going to come find you in Tucson.